Why are snowflakes unique?
Excellent question. All snowflakes are made up of frozen water, ice, so why don't they look exactly the same? Their unique shape comes from the unique conditions under which each snowflake is made. As a tiny ice crystal is blown into and out of a cloud, or rises or falls in a jet of slightly warmer or colder air, the shape of the growing snowflake can change. In a sense, their shape describes a story of how they were made.
What can go wrong if errors are present in DNA?
If errors do occur during DNA replication, they can have serious biological and physiological effects. Many diseases are believed to be associated with errors in genetic sequences, including cystic fibrosis, sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, Huntington's disease, Tay-Sachs disease, and a number of other genetic disorders. Other diseases or disorders may be linked to your genetics in a more complicated manner, such that you are more or less likely to suffer from them than the rest of the population. Some such diseases/disorders are cancers, mental/mood disorders, asthma, heart disease, and diabetes. Fortunately, we have several DNA repair mechanisms that are constantly on the lookout for damaged DNA.
What are colligative properties?
Properties of a solution that depend on the amount of solute dissolved.
How many more Earth-like planets might be out there?
It's hard to say, but considering the tremendous number of stars out there, see below, it's possible that there are a lot.
Why did Ilya Prigogine, Belgium, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his contributions to non-equilibrium thermodynamics, particularly the theory of dissipative structures. Non-equilibrium thermodynamics is traditionally considered a particularly hard topic to address, because the assumptions one can usually make regarding the behavior of molecules are thrown out the window. Prigogine's work expanded on existing thermodynamic theories to address systems far from equilibrium, such as when a liquid is heated rapidly from below. Prigogine demonstrate that structures called dissipative structures could exist under conditions far from equilibrium, and that these structures could only exist in conjunction with the surrounding environment. Why did Peter D.
What are comets made of?
Comets are space snowballs with some dirt sprinkled in. No, really. Comets are typically balls of rock, frozen water, and gases. Sometimes other chemicals are present in much smaller amounts. These include methanol and ethanol, hydrocarbons, and in 2009 NASA's Stardust mission confirmed that glycine, an amino acid, was present in the comet called Wild 2.
Mitchell, United Kingdom, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his contribution to the understanding of biological energy transfer through the formulation of the chemiosmotic theory. Mitchell received the prize for developing a theory of how electron transfer was coupled to ATP synthesis during oxidative phosphorylation and photophosphorylation. He proposed that a gradient of proton concentration, and thus also charge, was built up across the mitochondrial membrane, and that the reverse flow of protons down the concentration gradient provided the driving force for ATP synthesis. This is what is known as the chemiosmotic theory. Why did Herbert C.
What is a polydentate?
A ligand is described as polydentate if it can bind to a central atom multiple times.
What is a buffer?
A solution that tends to resist changes in pH upon addition of an acid or base.
What is an evaporation?
Conversion of a liquid into a gas.
How can we make chemical reactions go faster?
Two of the most common ways to make a reaction proceed faster are to increase the temperature at which the reaction is carried out or to use a catalyst to lower the energetic barrier to the reaction. With increased temperature, the amount of thermal energy available to overcome the energetic barrier to the reaction is increased. Of course, you'll also get more products faster if you just increase the concentration, S, of the reactant, S. Light can also serve as the catalyst, breaking a chemical bond to produce a species that is more reactive than the original reactant species.
Why does elevation matter for cooking times when I'm boiling water?
If you're boiling water in Denver, the temperature of that water will be about 5 degrees Celsius lower than if you were boiling water in Miami, because Denver is about a mile above sea level. There is less atmosphere pushing down on that pot of water than there would be at sea level. The decreased temperature that water boils at means that you'll need to increase cooking times the higher up you go.
What is a semi-metal?
An element, compound, or alloy that has metallic and non-metallic properties, also known as metalloid.
What is thalidomide?
Thalidomide is a drug that was once used to treat the symptoms of morning sickness during pregnancy as well as to help with sleeping problems. A few years after it became widely used, people started to realize that thalidomide was causing birth defects in newborns. These birth defects included phocomelia, abnormal formation of limbs, facial features, nerves, and other parts of the body, problems with sight or hearing resulting from abnormalities in the eyes and ears, gastrointestinal disorders, Passli disorder of the face, underdeveloped lungs, and problems with the digestive tract, heart, and kidneys. The use of thalidomide was then discontinued. Though even today there is still some research underway into its possible use in treating cancers. Similar to the situation with DDT, the problems that occurred during the use of thalidomide were particularly influential in motivating the government to tighten regulations on testing drugs and pesticides before their use.
What is a Pyrex, baking dish made of?
Pyrex, is a type of glass that was originally introduced in the year 1915 to be used in laboratory glassware and home kitchenware as well. It is a borosilicate glass composed of approximately 51% oxygen, 38% silicon, 14% boron, 1% aluminum, 1% potassium, and 0.3% sodium, by mass. Since its original introduction in the early 1900s, a different company has now become responsible for making Pyrex, glassware, and they now make it from a soda lime glass, which is different from the original formula. This new formula is cheaper to produce than the original and is more resistant to breaking when dropped, but has poorer heat resistance.
Is NMR the same as MRI?
MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging, is based on the same principles as NMR spectroscopy. While NMR is typically used to investigate problems related to chemistry and physics, the goal of MRI is to image nuclei in living things. This is accomplished in a way similar to how an NMR spectrum is collected, except that the applied magnetic field has a gradient, meaning the field strength is different. in different parts of the sample being imaged, usually human or animal tissue. This allows the use of microwave radiation to excite nuclei in individual slices of tissue, one at a time. The gradient in the magnetic field can be varied to collect the MRI of different slices of tissue, which can then be analyzed to get a picture of what is going on inside the body.
What does that mean?
Average kinetic energy is a precise way of saying how fast something is moving. In this case, on a molecular level, the faster molecules vibrate, the hotter they feel because heat is being transferred from the object to your hands.
What is a nucleus?
The center of an atom, consisting of positively charged protons and neutral neutrons.
Where does coal come from?
Coal is formed from trees and plants that died hundreds of millions of years ago. The dead plant material eventually became buried deep underground, which placed a large amount of pressure on it. Over time, the plant material became compressed and hardened, eventually forming coal. While this resource can be replaced over very long periods of time, we use it much faster than it can ever be regenerated.
What is a vacuum?
A vacuum is space without matter. The word vacuum derives from a Latin word that means empty. A perfect vacuum, or one with absolutely no matter in a given space, is very hard to achieve, but through modern engineering scientists can get pretty close without having to go into deep space to run their experiments.
What is temperature?
A physical property of matter that describes the average kinetic energy of molecules.
What is a molarity?
A measure of concentration defined as moles of solute per liter of solvent.
What is heat capacity?
The amount of heat required to raise the temperature of an object by 1 degree Celsius.
What is the philosopher's stone?
The philosopher's stone was an object of legend among alchemists. It was believed that the philosopher's stone possessed the power to make gold from other cheap metals. It has also been said to serve as the elixir of life, which was sought by many alchemists. Of course, such a stone has never been discovered, at least not outside of Hogwarts.
What is the boiling point elevation?
A colligative property, the increase in boiling point of a liquid as a solute is added.
What is an aqueous solution?
An aqueous solution is any solution in which water is the solvent. This term is used pretty frequently in chemistry, so it's good to be familiar with it.
Why can't lactose intolerant people eat dairy?
Most every dairy product contains lactose, which is a type of sugar. Specifically, lactose is a disaccharide made up of one galactose molecule and one glucose molecule. Lactase is an enzyme that breaks the bond that joins the galactose sugar to the glucose sugar to form this double sugar. Lactose-intolerant people lack the enzyme lactase, so they can't metabolize this particular molecule. All mammals can digest lactose when they are first born. But it is very rare for adult mammals to continue to be able to absorb the sugars found in dairy products. Recent studies have suggested that humans only obtain this ability around the same time they began domesticating animals. This makes it possibly the most recent example of evolution in our species.
What is Celsius?
Common temperature scale in which the melting and boiling points of water are defined to be 0 degrees Celsius and 100 degrees Celsius, respectively.
When did the theory of the atom come about?
The idea of the atom was originally proposed by ancient scholars. The philosophers Democritus and Leucippus are often credited with proposing the early notions of the atom, including the ideas that many different kinds of atoms exist, that there is a substantial amount of empty space between atoms, and that their properties are responsible for the properties of materials we see and interact with. For centuries, ideas about the structure and properties of the atom were based largely on conjecture and logical arguments. And it wasn't until the 1800s that experiments began to allow atomic theory to advance to where it is today.
What is an example of a multi-step chemical reaction?
Many reactions in biological chemistry, see also biochemistry, are multi-step chemical reactions. Glycolysis, which is the process of breaking down sugar to generate energy. For example, involves 10 sequential steps. Each step is carried out by a special type of catalyst, called an enzyme. There are countless multi-step processes in biological systems.
What is the difference between paramagnetic and diamagnetic complexes?
In chemistry, atoms, or molecules that have at least one unpaired electron. So there is a net spin to the molecule, are known as paramagnetic. If all electrons are paired, chemists refer to the compound as diamagnetic. When a magnetic field is applied, a paramagnetic substance will be attracted to the field, while diamagnetic molecules will be repelled from the field.
What is fracking?
Hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, is a technique used to break up rock deep underground in order to release the natural gas trapped inside it. The fluid injected into the rock is generally water-based, but the specific mixtures of chemicals dissolved in that water are generally a closely guarded secret. Using fluids to crack rocks is an old technique dating back over 100 years. But modern techniques trace back to experiments in the 1940s by Floyd Ferris and J.B. Clark, who worked for Staniland Oil and Gas.
Which elements are liquids at room temperature?
Actually, there are only two elements that are liquids at room temperature, mercury and bromine. Bromine is a diatomic compound, Br2, while mercury is a liquid metal.
What is the law of conservation of matter?
The law of conservation of matter states that matter cannot be created or destroyed. This is relevant to chemical reactions because it tells us that we must have just as many atoms of each element at the beginning of a reaction as we do at the end of a reaction. In the example above, this is reflected by the fact that we use 2 molecules of oxygen, or 4 oxygen atoms from our reactants, to produce 1 molecule of CO2 and 2 molecules of H2O for a total of 4 oxygen atoms in our products.
What is an ohm meter?
A device used to measure electrical resistance.
What is a d orbital?
An atomic orbital with an angular momentum quantum number of 2.
What is a phase boundary?
The interface between two phases, e.g., solid-liquid, liquid-gas, or solid-gas boundary.
What is specific volume?
The volume occupied by a compound per unit mass.
How are ceramics made?
Ceramics are nonmetallic materials that are made of a mixture of metallic and nonmetallic elements. A ceramic is made by taking an inorganic material, heating it to a high temperature such that the atomic/molecular components can rearrange easily, and then allowing the material to cool to room temperature. The resulting materials are typically strong, hard, brittle, and are poor conductors of heat and electricity.
What is microwave spectroscopy?
Microwave spectroscopy, as the name implies, is spectroscopy carried out using electromagnetic radiation in the microwave region of the spectrum, 0.3 to 300 GHz. The energies associated with microwaves are relatively low, and these energies are typically a good match for energy level spacing between the different rotational levels of molecules. Thus, microwave spectroscopy is typically used to study the rotational energy levels of molecules. The rotational energy levels of molecules are typically studied in the gas phase.
What is the atomic radius of an atom?
The atomic radius of an atom is defined as half of the distance between two atoms of the same element held together in a chemical bond. Not surprisingly, these are very small distances. For hydrogen, the smallest atom, the atomic radius is 0.37 angstroms, or 3.7 x 10 to 11 meters.
What is a half-life?
The amount of time required to consume half of the initial amount of a reactant.
Why did Peter Agar, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For discoveries concerning channels in cell membranes for the discovery of water channels and Roderick McKinnon. United States. For discoveries concerning channels in cell membranes for structural and mechanistic studies of ion channels. Agar received half of this prize for isolating a membrane protein that serves as a water channel in cells. For roughly 200 years it had been postulated that cells contained channels capable of moving water in and out of cells. But Agar was the first to finally discover a concrete example of a water channel. McKinnon received the other half of this prize for his work on ion channels, and in particular for his characterization of the spatial structure of a potassium channel. For the first time, this allowed chemists to see how potassium ions flowed in and out of cells.
What is miscible?
Liquids that when mixed form a single phase.
How does a nuclear reactor generate energy?
Nuclear power comes from the energy released in fission processes, like the ones we discussed in nuclear chemistry. The nuclear reactors used for commercial energy production make use of controlled chain reactions of uranium-235. Upon colliding with a neutron, uranium-235 decays spontaneously into two lighter atoms, releasing energy for each atom of uranium that is split. The amount of energy released in the fission process is very large compared to that released from the combustion reactions that we use to obtain energy from fossil fuels. The result is that we can get a lot of energy from a relatively small amount of uranium. In fact, a kilogram of enriched uranium can generate about the same amount of energy as 8 million liters of gasoline.
What gives a food its taste?
Molecules, of course. You probably learned in school that there are 4 basic tastes: sweet, bitter, sour, and salty. Your science textbook probably also had a diagram like the one on the following page, showing that your bitter taste buds are located on the back of your tongue, and sweet is tasted on the tip. Wrong. 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 Not only are there at least 5 basic tastes, but they're basically spread out evenly across your tongue. The 5 basic tastes are the 4 you know from elementary school. And umami. If you grew up eating Western cuisine, umami tastes like message, or maybe you just think Asian food. There is debate as to whether there is a 6th basic taste bud that senses fat, or maybe another sensor for piquance, spiciness. But not even those 5, or 6, or 7 basic tastes fully account for all the sensations you get during eating. Wine is probably the best example, if you drink wine, of course.
What is a ceramic?
An inorganic crystalline solid typically prepared by heating.
How do painkillers know what part of the body to target? Or phrased another way, why doesn't your whole body get a little numb when you take a painkiller?
Let's limit this discussion to what are called nonsteroidal drugs, like ibuprofen. Ibuprofen, and other drugs like it, work by interrupting the series of signals that your body uses to communicate pain to your brain. The COX, cyclooxygenase, family of enzymes play an important, but intermediate, role in this pathway. This means that the COX enzymes take one type of signal and convert it into another that your body recognizes as pain. By working on an intermediate messenger, ibuprofen only takes effect where the pain is occurring. That first signal has to already be there, so your whole body doesn't get numb when you take ibuprofen.
How many cells are there in your body?
An adult human is made up of approximately 50 trillion cells.
So is there any real way to stop onions from making you cry?
Everyone's mother seems to have their own unique proposal about how to avoid crying over diced onions. But there's only one that makes any chemical sense. Excluding wearing a gas mask, put the onion in the fridge before you cut it. Almost every chemical reaction is slower at lower temperature. And since the lacrimator in onions is produced when you cut it, and not naturally present in the onion, you can give yourself more tear-free time to dice if the onion is cold.
What is galvanization?
Application of a thin layer of zinc metal to steel or iron, which prevents the formation of rust.
How is oil refined?
There are several processes that can be used to refine oil. The oldest way is through distillation, which involves heating up the crude oil slowly, allowing the different hydrocarbons to boil off one at a time, and then collecting them as vapors. There are also newer chemical refinement methods that can use a chemical reaction to convert one type of hydrocarbon into another.
What causes the tides in the ocean?
The ocean tides are caused by the gravitational forces between the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon, along with the centrifugal force imposed by the Earth's rotation. As the Earth rotates, and as the three bodies move relative to one another, the gradual and recurring shifts in the balance of gravitational forces cause the water in the oceans to tend to move toward one coast or the other.
What is phytoremediation?
Some pollutants, such as heavy metals, are not often readily treated by bioremediation techniques. In such cases, phytoremediation may be useful. Phytoremediation relies on the introduction of certain plants that are capable of absorbing a pollutant and concentrating it in the above-ground portion of the plant, which can then be removed. The pollutant-containing plants can then be destroyed in an incinerator to concentrate the pollutants even more. Or, in some cases, the pollutants can even be recycled for additional use.
Is DNA a polymer?
It is. DNA contains two long polymers of sugars, called nucleotides. Attached to each sugar molecule are phosphate groups and a nitrogen base, technically a nucleobase. The sequence of these nucleobases encodes the information in DNA. For more on DNA, see the biochemistry chapter.
So, to restate the question, why do plants reflect any light at all?
The easiest answer here is that absorbing red and blue energy obviously works well enough. So evolution stuck with it. Evolution, after all, doesn't provide the best solution, but rather a solution. Nonetheless, let's make some guesses as to why plants are green. Chlorophyll isn't just after energy in general, but needs very specific wavelengths to pass along energy to the reactive centers of photosystems I and II. The second reasonable guess is that too much energy is not a good thing. Absorption of light creates high-energy species. And if they aren't used in some productive way, the energy will find something else to do. These other reactions could be destructive to cells. In sum, chlorophyll only takes what it needs or what it can use.
Why do some fruits and vegetables turn brown after you cut them?
When you cut or drop an apple, potato, or other fruit, some cells leak their contents, exposing all sorts of cellular machinery to air. The key player in the browning of fruits is tyrosinase, an enzyme that is involved in the oxidation of tyrosine specifically and phenols in general. Tyrosinase plays two key roles in the production of melanin, which is a general term for all sorts of pigments found in plants and animals. So once tyrosinase leaks out of the cell, it is exposed to all the oxygen and phenols it needs to start making brown pigments.
What is para?
Term used to describe two substituents on an aromatic ring that are bonded to positions opposite to each other.
How much salt, NaCl, is in the average human body?
The average adult human body contains about 250 g, or roughly half of a pound, of salt.
What is charcoal?
Charcoal is made of carbon and ash and is formed when water and other substances are removed from animals or plants. It can be produced by heating wood or other biologically derived materials in the absence of oxygen.
What is a bonding orbital?
A molecular orbital that is more stable than the atomic orbitals that were combined to generate it.
What is a manometer?
An instrument used to measure pressures of gases.
What is insoluble?
A substance that does not dissolve in a solvent.
What is PVC, polyvinyl chloride?
If one of the hydrogen atoms on every ethylene monomer in polyethylene is replaced by a chlorine atom. Note that this is not how this material is actually made. You get PVC, or polyvinyl chloride. It's the third largest volume polymer produced each year behind polyethylene and polypropylene. It is a very tough polymer, so it is used to make pipes and flooring among many other things. PVC can also be softened, technical term, plasticized, by introducing small organic molecules, like phthalates, a benzene ring with two esters. Among other applications, plasticized PVC is used to insulate electric wires and to make your garden hose.
Does spinach provide a good source of dietary iron?
Spinach has the same dietary content as many other green vegetables. However, spinach additionally contains oxalic acid. which actually prevents iron from being absorbed by the body. Thus it may actually be a worse source of iron than other foods. An interesting anecdote: the iron content of spinach was initially reported to be about 10 times higher than it actually is, all due only to a misplaced decimal point. Spinach does contain plenty of good antioxidants and vitamins, though, so we don't mean to suggest you should stop eating it. It's just that if you heard it was an exceptionally great source of iron, you may have been misled by the original mix-up over how much iron is actually present in this vegetable.
What is a molecular formula?
The type and number of atoms in a molecule. Unlike empirical formula, the ratios are not reduced.
What is weight?
The force applied by gravity on an object.
What is an acid?
A molecule that has easily removable hydrogen ions, Brønsted-Lowry acid. Can accept a pair of electrons, Lewis, or releases hydrogen ions in solution, Arrhenius.
What is vulcanization?
Chemical reaction that creates cross-links between individual polymer chains in rubber.
What is a shell?
A way of classifying the orbitals in which electrons can reside based on their principal quantum number.
What is a liquid?
A state of matter with a defined volume, but no fixed shape.
Why did Otto Hahn, Germany, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his discovery of the fission of heavy nuclei. Hans and his colleagues' work discovered nuclear fission, and in particular that uranium could be split in a chain reaction by nuclear fission. This discovery was perhaps recognized as much for its importance as it was for its potential danger to society if not properly used and controlled, and Hahn himself was keenly aware of the potential for danger. Nonetheless, this discovery paved the way for much future research into nuclear chemistry, as well as for the development of modern nuclear reactors.
So if all polymers are not the same size, what is the weight of a polymer?
Good question. If we know the number of monomers that make up a polymer chain, technical term, degree of polymerization, then the molecular weight of the polymer is the molecular weight of the monomer multiplied by that number of monomers.
What is condensation?
Conversion of a gas into a liquid.
What is an auxiliary substance?
Chemical auxiliaries are substances like solvents, separation agents, or dispersing agents that are used in the course of a chemical synthesis but are not reagents because they are not incorporated into the chemical product.
How were herbal medicines discovered?
If we had the story of how each and every medicinal herb was discovered, each would likely be an interesting and unique tale. Unfortunately, the use of plants as medicine predates written human history by a few millennia. The earliest written records come from the great ancient civilizations of humankind.
What is work?
Work is a name used in physics for processes that transfer energy between objects by the application of a force over a distance. Take throwing a baseball, for example. As your arm moves, your hand applies a force in the direction the baseball is moving. During the time the ball is in your hand and moving forward, you are doing work on the ball. The total amount of work done can be calculated as the product of the force you apply times the distance over which you applied force. Once it leaves your hand, you're no longer applying a force, so you aren't doing work on it anymore.
What is nucleation?
A process through which a crystal, or a drop of liquid, grows around a small site.
What polymers are found in nature?
There are a ton. Proteins, enzymes, cellulose, starch, and silk are all polymers.
What is a saturated solution?
A solution that contains the maximum amount of dissolvable solution, I. The addition of any more solution will not dissolve, and will remain in a separate phase.
What determines the density of a substance?
At the most basic level, density is determined by how close the atoms or molecules in a substance are packed, as well as the mass of those atoms. While it's not quite as simple as assuming that the heaviest elements on the periodic table have the highest densities. Having a high mass does help. Heavy metals like iridium and osmium are the densest metals known to date. Remember that the density of a material does not depend on how much material you have. The density of 1 gram of lead is the same as the density of 1 kilogram of lead. Density is an intensive property. So changing the amount of a material you have does not affect its density.
Why can some batteries be recharged and others cannot?
Batteries produce electricity from a chemical reaction. So to recharge a battery, we would have to be able to reverse the chemical reaction by applying an electric current. In truth, most batteries use chemical reactions that could be reversed. But there are efficiency considerations that come into play. Rechargeable batteries make use of reactions that can be reversed easily. Many times, without too much degradation of the battery materials. One-time use batteries typically use reactions that could only be reversed and reused a couple of times before they would not work very well anymore.
What is isothermal?
With constant temperature.
What was nylon first used for?
The first commercial application was probably toothbrush bristles. For centuries toothbrushes were made of coarse animal hairs, usually boar. Until DuPont, R., introduced Dr. West's Miracle toothbrush in 1938.
Can sound move through a vacuum?
No. Sound is a mechanical wave, which means that for the wave to move, actual molecules must bump into one another. In a vacuum, there is no matter, so in space, no one can hear you scream.
How large is an atom relative to things we can see?
The smallest object a human eye can see is approximately 0.1 millimeters, or 10 to 4 m. Atoms have sizes on the order of 10 to 10 m, or approximately 1 million times smaller than something the human eye can possibly see.
What is a renewable energy source?
A renewable energy source is one that is provided by resources that are continuously replenished or which will always be available during the foreseeable future of the planet.
What is the Hess's law?
States that the change in enthalpy for a reaction that occurs in multiple steps is equal to the sum of the change in enthalpy for each step, related to the first law of thermodynamics.
What is the chelation?
Binding of a ligand to a metal atom through two or more positions.
How is biodiesel produced?
The production of biodiesel fuel involves a chemical reaction called transesterification of lipids. Those from the vegetable oil or fat, with alcohols to produce alkyl esters. Methanol is most commonly used as the alcohol in these reactions, which leads to methyl esters, though other alcohols have also been used. Glycerol is a byproduct of the transesterification reaction, and this compound is actually formed in fairly substantial quantities, ca 10% by mass. This has given rise to research directed toward finding ways to carry out chemical reactions beginning with, or involving, glycerol, such that the cost efficiency of the overall process of biodiesel production might be improved.
What is a polymer?
A chain molecule consisting of a repeating series of a single unit, or possibly multiple repeating units.
What holds nuclei together?
The nucleus of an atom consists of neutrons, which are unchanged charged, and protons, which are positively charged. While the unchanged charged neutrons don't feel an electrostatic attraction or repulsion to other particles, the positively charged protons should repel each other. In fact, this repulsive force between the protons is quite strong, because protons in the same nucleus are very close together. Thus the force that holds them together must be a very strong force. Indeed it is, and it's even named the strong force. This strong force acts only over distances on the order of 10 to 15 m, a very short distance. If the protons were to become separated by a more substantial distance, The strong force would decrease in magnitude faster than the repulsive force, and the protons would be pushed apart. It's also often said that neutrons act as a sort of glue to help bind all of the neutrons and protons together. Since there seem to be favored relationships between the number of neutrons and protons present in stable nuclei.
How do fireworks work?
Fireworks, those that explode in the sky. Technically called pyrotechnic stars or aerial shells, have only a few essential components. Once the shell gets up in the air, the main event is fueled by aluminum metal or sometimes a mix of aluminum and magnesium metal. By themselves, these elements don't burn quickly enough in the atmosphere, and the flames they produce are just boring white. So this fuel component is mixed with another chemical that helps the aluminum burn. Technically oxidize faster. Different oxidizing compounds make different colored flames when they react. Purple, NO3, blue, CSNO3, green, BaCl2, yellow, NaNO3, or red, SrCO3. There are lots of other components of modern fireworks, like gunpowder, to help disperse these chemicals to make big shapes. But all of the chemistry is based on these simple reactions.
Florey, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his fundamental work, both theoretical and experimental, in the physical chemistry of macromolecules. Florey contributed greatly to polymer science by developing metrics for characterizing polymers and for comparing different polymers against one another. This was a task that had often proved difficult due to the different compositions and conformational arrangements found in different polymers. He made great strides toward putting polymer science on a firm theoretical footing, which was lacking when he entered the field.
What happens when you add sodium metal to water?
Sodium metal reacting with water can produce a violent response. Sodium and water react according to the equation, 2Na, plus 2H2O, L. 2NaOH, Aq, plus H2, G, plus heat. As you can see, this reaction produces heat. And it turns out that the amount of heat produced can be pretty substantial. The heat can even cause the hydrogen gas, produced in the reaction, to ignite. Thus, reacting according to this equation, H2, G, plus O2, G, H2O, G, plus heat. The heat produced by both of these reactions can even cause any currently unreacted sodium metal to also ignite and burn according to the equation. Na, S, plus O2, G, Na2O2, S, from these reactions. It is probably clear that the reaction of sodium with water can produce quite a lot of heat.
Who were Diels and Alder?
The Diels-Alder reaction, like many reactions in organic chemistry, is named after the chemists who discovered it, in this case Otto Paul Hermann Diels, 1876–1954, and Kurt Alder, 1902–1958. Kurt Alder was actually Diels' student at the University of Kiel, and Alder was awarded a PhD in 1926. Alder and his advisor Diels jointly received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1950.
What is an element?
An element is the most basic form of a chemical substance. If you have an object made of a pure element, all of its atoms have the same number of protons. We'll discuss what this is more a little later, and the same basic chemical properties. There are not many objects that we encounter on a daily basis that are actually composed of only a single element. Most things are formed from atoms of several types of elements bonded together.
Is the speed of light always the same?
The speed of light actually depends on what material the light is moving through. Each material has a property called an index of refraction. From the index of refraction, we can calculate the speed of light passing through a material from the following equation: V equals c/n.
What is radical?
A species containing unpaired electron density, typically involving an odd number of valence electrons.
Why did George de Hevesy, Hungary, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his work on the use of isotopes as tracers in the study of chemical processes. De Hevesy was a pioneer in using radioactive isotopes to carry out chemical studies. By using these isotopes as labels, he was able to track what was happening to the isotopes he introduced into a sample, providing unique new insights in a variety of areas. For example, by introducing radioactive sodium into a human body, he was able to track its spatial movement throughout the body, as well as its excretion from the body. He found that after 1 day, blood corpuscles had lost/replaced roughly half of their sodium content. Of course, other scientists later picked up on this method and applied it themselves.
What is a standard state?
A standard state is a set of reference conditions with respect to which properties can be described/calculated under other conditions. For example, the properties at standard state conditions of a gas may be defined by its properties at 293.15 K and 1 bar of pressure. Knowledge of the properties of a gas under these standard conditions can be used to calculate the properties under other conditions.
What is radon?
Radon is an element that is widely known for its potential to cause cancer. It is the heaviest gas known to man, with a density roughly 9 times greater than that of air. It is usually found in soil and rocks, though it can also be found in water. Fortunately, radon detectors are commonly available that allow you to test your home for elevated radon levels.
What is an isotactic polymer?
A polymer in which all substituents are located on the same side of the backbone.
What are some of the most harmful organic pollutants toward the environment?
The EPA provides a list of 12 particularly persistent organic pollutants to watch out for. The list includes aldrin, chloridane, dichlorophenyltrichloroethane, DDT, dieldrin, endrin, heptachlor, hexachlorobenzene, Myrex, toxaphene, polychlorinated biphenyls, polychlorinated dibenzopdioxins, and polychlorinated dibenzofurans. The EPA has colloquially named this group of compounds as the Dirty Dozen.
Do other Earth-like planets exist?
At least one other Earth-like planet has been discovered. And it is possible that many more may exist. In 2011, NASA's Kepler Space Telescope discovered a planet named Kepler 22b for now, orbiting a star about 600 light-years from Earth. Recall that a light-year is the distance light travels in 1 year, so that's extremely far away. This planet is estimated to be about 2.4 times the size of Earth and exists in an area known as a habitable zone, which means that it is in an area that could potentially serve as a host to life as we know it. Little is known at this time about the atmosphere or composition of this planet, but it is nonetheless interesting that it exists.